I've just been appointed and officially start at the beginning of January. So I'm playing in these concerts still as a guest officially.
Really?
But I'm really excited to be starting with the orchestra. It's a big move for me. I've been working in London, the Philharmonia, till quite recently, and very excited to be coming up to Liverpool. It's coming back home for me, really, which is very exciting.
I think it's my 18th year now. I'm a local lad. I started with the Merseyside Youth Orchestra and went to the Royal Northern College of Music. I had a job in Spain straight out of college. After a year there, I came back and I worked with Northern Ballet, which had a freelance orchestra at the time, and I freelanced for the rest of the year. They did 6 months work a year at the ballet. So the rest of the other 6 months, I just freelanced, and Liverpool Phil was one of those places I freelanced. And the job came up, and funnily enough, I got it, which it wasn't engineered that I got a job that was local to where I grew up, but it's very nice to be here. And I first came to concerts in this hall in 1965, so it feels very much at home for me. One of those first concerts I came to here was Peter and the Wolf, and as a sort of 6-year-old, I suppose it was. And Tim's laughing because his daughter's 3 and absolutely adores Peter and the Wolf. Great introduction to orchestral music, as it is. And I loved the sound of, firstly, the bassoon, and secondly, the horn, and the horn got it on looks. This is one of the few halls in the country where you don't feel as though you're playing on your own.
Yeah, exactly.
The acoustic's fantastic. Don't you find?
Yeah, absolutely. Certainly for the horns, it's a very friendly place. Having spent quite a lot of the last few years playing at the Festival Hall in London, which is an extremely unfriendly place for the horns to play because you have a wall directly behind you when you're playing, which obviously for an instrument that's pointing backwards, it's not really what you want. You want somewhere where the sound can just have some space, and as you can see at the back of the stage here, it's acres of space before you hit any kind of reflective surface, so it's a much more friendly, much warmer kind of sound that you're able to get as a horn player, which makes it obviously very satisfying to play here.
Quite a number of the halls, Bridgewater Hall, Birmingham, I find, wherever you are, or wherever they seat the horns in the orchestra, every time you play you feel as though you're the only person in the hall playing, whereas here you do feel much more part of the ensemble, don't you?
Yeah, and the other thing here, which is a very big factor, is the fact that you don't have an audience directly behind you. Again, with the horn, you're dealing in reflected sound all the time. The sound that you hear under your right ear is not the sound that you want the audience to hear. And obviously, if you have an audience sitting directly behind you and an audience sitting in front of you, you can't make a sound that's appropriate for both of those. So not having an audience behind you and allowing the sound to travel a distance before it reaches the audience, again, it makes it much more enjoyable to play because you haven't got that thought in the back of your mind all the time that the people behind you are hearing something. And the other thing which we have to deal with as horn players, which the audience won't be aware of particularly, is that because our sound has to travel backwards, then hit something and then bounce forwards before it hits the audience, we have to play a long way in front of the beat to make it sound on time. We call it anticipating. And again, as a result of that, if the audience are sitting behind the horn section, directly behind the horn section, they'll get a very peculiar picture of what the actual timing is of chords happening together. In effect, if they're behind us and it sounds together, by the time it reaches the audience in the front of the stage, it'll sound late. You can change the way that a chord sounds by where you play in relation to the beat. So if you play directly on the conductor's beat, the beginning of the chord will actually have quite a hard front on it. Whereas if you play just fractionally behind and allow the sound to kind of appear, it gives the quality of sound something very different. So it's something that as players you'd be adjusting from phrase to phrase, really. Well, the thing is, by the time it reaches the conductor, it shouldn't really make any difference. It should be up to us to adapt. He should give the downbeats clearly enough that everybody can adjust to it, and you produce your own individual sound in a way that by the time it reaches him, He should be in the centre of the auditorium in a decent concert hall, and you should be able to adjust the distance that the sound has to travel in order that by the time it reaches him, it should be on time. I mean, it's a certain amount of guesswork, obviously, and that's part of the rehearsal process. And also it will depend on who you're playing with. If you're playing with a percussion instrument, for instance, with a very clear attack on the beginning of it, the way you have to adjust your anticipation is going to be completely different to if you're playing with a string instrument which has a slightly more gentle kind of sound on the beginning of it. So it's there's a certain amount of adjustment that needs to be done anyway, but the conductor should be hearing everything all together, and it's up to you to adjust that point. But obviously with an audience behind you, that possibility is completely out of the question.
We have 5 horns in our section. Most composers write for 4 horns, and I have a very unusual job in that I'm the bumper. I sit next to the first horn, and I do. Well, as I say, I've got someone to play all the hard bits for me. He does all the solos, and I sort of give him a break basically now and again, just so that he's got a sort of fairly fresh lip to play solos. And you become very good at sort of putting one note in a phrase without hopefully the rest of the orchestra and the conductor noticing that it's, so you get sort of seamless phrases, don't we?
Yeah, that's the plan.
Don't we?
That's the plan.
Most of the music colleges don't teach people how to do it, yet it's one of the first things you have to do when you get your first sort of professional engagement. Generally, whoever is the regular member, the regular bumper in the section, would move to one of the other places if somebody goes ill or whatever, and then they'll get an extra in to bump. But in actual fact, when we do Mahler 5 later on this week, Tim's asked for me to bump. Because it's such a hard first horn part, you sort of want to be able to rely on somebody. I'll show him.
Working with Chris is one of the things that makes this job attractive for me, because it can completely transform your life as a first horn. Yeah. A bumper can totally wreck your day, or can make your day really straightforward. Just exactly as Chris says, with just that one note that allows you to breathe in the middle of a line. I mean, effectively what we're doing is turning what composers have written into something which is really playable. You're looking for this kind of mix of all the individual sounds together into just this one unit, and that's the thing that makes the horn such a satisfying instrument. Because even in the remainder of the brass section, you'd never really have that many completely independent parts, all aiming at the same thing within the one section. So although in the violins you could have 14, 16, 18 players, they're all playing one or possibly 2 lines. In the woodwind section, again, you're generally talking about 2, maybe 3 lines, and in the horn section to have at least 4. In the case of Mahler 5 that we're doing this week, 6 individual parts, it's quite a unique section in that respect, that you have all these incredibly different lines, but all working together, all trying to make the same kind of sound, and all matching together, all articulating the same way, and it's deeply satisfying when it really all comes together. Yeah. The thing with Mahler from the horn player's point of view is that he's incredibly precise about what he wants. There's so many composers that give a kind of rough idea of a phrase, maybe putting one phrasing mark over 4, 8, even more bars at a time. Mahler kind of micromanages. And in a way, I think, particularly in the solo moments, less so in the section moments, but in the solo moments, it's almost taking these tiny, tiny pieces of information and trying to turn them back into a long phrase that's the challenge for the player and the conductor. Because more often than not, you'll have an articulation mark for every single note. And trying to give that variety within the line and be really true to what the composer has written can almost end up destroying the music, because you end up playing it note by note by note by note, each one with a different inflection on it, and actually you lose the shape of the overall line. And if it's possible to achieve an overall line of 8 bars or 16 bars, whilst nevertheless still having the possibility that the first note in the bar could be with a tenuto mark, the second note with an accent mark, the third note and fourth note slurred together, just these tiny details, but trying to incorporate those into the long phrase. I think that's what we're aiming for as performers, and certainly what Vasily is aiming for as a conductor, I would have said, is trying to get the long sweeps while still remaining true to these tiny details as well. Vasily has been a major part of me wanting to come to the orchestra. I find him a very exciting conductor to play for.
We've worked together for, I don't know, 5 years, something like that. Since he first came. So it's sort of a relationship that's developed over a period of time. It's a lot of detail in rehearsals, but then just letting you play when you actually get to the concert, and not sort of holding back and.
Yeah.
Isn't it? It's
yeah, absolutely. I mean, from the
go.
very basic horn player's point of view, the thing that you instantly expect to get from every conductor is you're too loud and you're late. And it happens with every conductor everywhere that you go. The horns are too loud, the horns are too loud, the horns are too loud. And actually what's really great from Vasily is just giving us the freedom to actually really play and produce a sound. And again, it's just about producing that kind of excitement for the audience.